I'm still on this idea of the sublime, and the project generally in this series of videos, if I can just remind myself, is to connect the sublime up to the sacred, because I don't understand the sacred, I don't get the whole idea. I mean, I know what the word means, but I don't get it really. Or more specifically, I kind of get it, but I don't know how to evaluate it properly. If I'm honest, I'm not sure if anybody knows how to evaluate it properly, because there's such a large felt component. You know, the felt component of the sacred I'm kind of describing as the sublime. You know what I mean? There might be some content to the sacred, there might be some entities that we decide are sacred, there might be some beliefs we decide are sacred, some objects, some people, some bits of philosophy, you know. We can decide all these things as sacred, but that's just an evaluation, you know what I mean? We just, you know, on the one hand, it's just like saying these things have got a positive value on some checklist. That doesn't make them sacred. I think what makes them sacred is they have this felt component. Just like lots of other things have got felt components. I feel like I've talked a lot about the felt component of different things, you know. You know, like knowing has a felt component. You can attest to the truth status of a proposition you hold in your head, but that's not the same as knowing something. Knowing something has this felt component, and so on. You know, belief has a felt component, all the rest of it. And I think this idea of value and within the sacred, again, as I say, has this felt component. It's a very strong feeling, and I'm associating it with the sublime. At some point I will have to get onto this idea of feeling, because I feel like I'm talking a lot about that without... It could be easily dismissed, I think, if I'm not careful. It could sound like I'm talking about something unnecessary, which maybe I am. But I want to eventually get to a point where I can start talking about the role of feeling within, you know, kind of wider actions and ideas, and particularly about what kind of processes would be underway to judge whether a feeling is valid or not. That's the subject of another video, I think. Anyway, this sublime, God, sublime. What I'm thinking of here, and this is revisiting some ideas I talked about a while back, probably about a year ago now, I think, maybe more. And it's to do with these other intimations of the sublime. You know, where else that idea features in the landscape of our ideas, and what images it conjures up. And in other words, you know, what possible images are at work behind the scenes of our conscious thought. You know, what kinds of things are happening here in the background of our imagination, which are driving our feelings. Oops, the train, look. There it goes, there's the sound of a disappearing train. So what's going on in the background when we think about the sublime? And here I'm thinking specifically about sublimation. Now that might seem a long way away from the sublime, but maybe it is. But I'm not sure it is really. I think there's some aspects of sublimation that feature in our understandings of the sublime. And sublimation, the way I'm talking about it right now, has two applications, two meanings, or it features within two discourses, two conversations. The first is the discourse of chemistry. Sublimation has a particular meaning within chemistry, and it basically describes the action of any compound or substance which goes from a solid directly to a vapour without going through an intervening period of liquid. It doesn't go through a liquid phase. So I think, I might be wrong, but I think potassium permanganate does that. Iodine does something very like it, although I believe that's not quite sublimation, that's something related to it. And a number of other compounds and chemicals do that. You put them in a glass, in the bottom of a test tube, you heat them up, and they just kind of smoke a little bit and then just seem to disappear. And if you're lucky, if you're doing it right, and the top of your test tube is cool, what will happen is they'll reform at the top of your test tube, so they just disappear from one place, go through an intervening period of gaseous invisibility, and then reappear in a higher place. Sublimation. It's a brilliant process. You know, there's something there for me about which relates to the sublime. You know what I mean? There's something about our understanding of the sublime, that feeling of you know, gobsmacked godliness. You know, that kind of awestruck, reverent, wide open sense of beauty and terror and longing and love, you know, all mixed together. There's a little bit of that, I think, in this weird little chemical reaction, in metaphorical form, but in body and literal form as well. you know, you've got something which is tactile and of the senses, something you can hold in your hand. It's a solid substance, and don't get more tactile than that. And then by the application of heat, it just kind of disappears, expands and becomes invisible and vaporous. And rises, you know, it rises up into the empyrean at the top of the test tube. You know, and high places are always good places to be, and going up is always increasing in power and status, isn't it? And always increasing in value. So you've got this substance is doing that, and then it's just kind of magically reappearing at the top in a different place. Sublimation. So I think there's something in there, just a tiny fragment of the sublime, or the character of the sublime in that little chemical exchange that's taking place. And then the other use of sublimation is in Freud, isn't it? Supposedly, if you've got I'm cartoon Freud, I'm afraid, sorry, but if you've got some kind of, let's say, unreasonable desire, let's say, and in Freud that's usually something like incest, or I don't know, let's say you've got some kind of unreasonable desire. In Freud, there's two things you can do with that desire if you want to stay reasonably healthy. One is to repress it, which means push it down into the dark place, like the sump at the bottom of the ship. Push it down, push it under pressure, as that kind of tight pressure thing, repressed. The other thing, if you don't want to repress it, a much more healthy option, rather than that of course, is to sublimate it, which means it goes up and into the bright light of day and appears as something like creativity, or as art, or music. You know, all those strange desires become sublimated and rise and are turned to higher things. You know what I mean? So they start out as something of the body, and rather than getting rid of the body and entering the bowels of the earth, instead of doing that, it's almost as if this sublimated desire rises out of the body and joins the empyrean. It's this bright, wide open, boundless, evacuated, void-like space it moves into, which, as I say, in Freud is relatively positive. Again, I think there's something of that classical understanding of the sublime. There's a bit that you find in Burke and Kant and those other people I've mentioned in the nature poets, in those paintings. There's a little bit of that in Freud there, I think. The image, I think, is the same. The image is one of vastness, of a movement towards vastness and vaporousness and unboundedness and formlessness. You know, a gas is formless, isn't it? As this sublimed gas, this sublime desire moves up and expands, it becomes immeasurable and it becomes formless, shapeless, slightly scary, maybe. Yeah, doesn't know what it wants to do today. It's been pouring with rain earlier on. Now it's not, it's just a bit sticky here in Cheshire.